ever stop to think about, the very first family, Adam and Eve, how did they even begin to navigate life, love, and the whole family thing?
It's a fascinating thought.
It really is. It kind of pulls at something deep within us, right? Touching on both faith and just what it means to be human.
Absolutely.
Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you provide and really dig into them, extracting the key insights.
That's right.
And we know you, our listener. We think of you as the learner. You're looking for knowledge that's quick to grasp, but also thoroughly considered.
They're on different angles, those aha moments.
Exactly, without feeling totally overwhelmed by information. So today we're diving specifically into your curiosity about Adam and Eve.
And we're looking at this through a couple of specific lenses: Christian history and psychology.
Yeah, the sources you sent offer some really interesting takes on everything from, well, how they multiplied to the dynamics within that very first family.
It covers a lot of ground.
It does. So our goal today, our mission for this deep dive, is to explore these foundational questions about Adam and Eve and their family as understood in Christian thought.
And then connect these ancient stories to maybe broader understandings of human nature, our relationship with the divine.
Precisely. Okay, let's jump right in and unpack a really fundamental question. How did Adam and Eve even know how to reproduce?
Right. Well, what's fascinating, looking through that Christian historical lens, is this idea of divine design meeting, natural human capacity.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
So you have the command in Genesis 1.28, be fruitful and multiply. The thinking is that wasn't just a suggestion, It implies God actually equipped them, that the knowledge, the understanding was inherent part of their creation, like a foundational blessing intertwined with who they were.
Okay, so kind of a built-in understanding, maybe. Not like they needed an instruction manual.
Exactly. But then you also bring in the psychological perspective.
Right. Were there just natural human elements at play, too?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, psychology tells us humans have innate drives, right? And the urge to procreate is a pretty powerful one.
Sure.
Adam and Eve, created as fully formed adults.
Right.
Well, they would have possessed these natural inclinations, physical attraction, plus their capacity for reason, that God-given intellect. All of that would have naturally guided them. So it's not just the divine command in isolation. It's more like a synergy between their created nature and their inherent drives.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's where it gets interesting, I think. The sources also point out we shouldn't necessarily read this part of Genesis like a literal step-by-step biological guide.
Precisely.
That's crucial.
It's conveying something deeper, isn't it?
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture of Christian history, the main aim of the Adam and Eve story isn't a science lesson. It's about communicating profound spiritual truths.
About our relationship with God. Yeah, about our relationship with God, our place in creation. The focus is on humanity's unique status, made in God's image, capable of love, capable of bringing forth new life. It's less about the mechanics of reproduction.
And maybe the Bible's silence on those specifics? It says something, too.
Some interpretations suggest exactly that. Perhaps it underscores the sacredness, the privacy of marital intimacy. It's just not the focus of the text.
That really reframes it. It's about the spiritual foundation, not the biological details necessarily. Okay, so let's shift to another question that always seems to come up.
I think I know where you're going.
How did their sons find wives? I mean, Genesis names Cain, Abel, and Seth, but then it's kind of silent on where their partners came from.
This definitely raises a point, and Christian historical thought acknowledges it's one of the less clear aspects of the early Genesis narrative.
So the Bible just doesn't say explicitly.
It doesn't. And again, the focus there is on conveying those core spiritual truths: God, humanity's fall, the beginnings of redemption. It wasn't meant to be a comprehensive family tree, or a detailed historical record like we might expect today.
Right. And the context matters, too, like ancient genealogies.
Exactly. Ancient Near Eastern genealogies, which sort of provide the background for Genesis, they typically highlighted key figures, the ones important to the main story.
Okay, so the narrative is prioritizing the main theological points, fine. But it still leaves us wondering, practically speaking, how did they find partners? What are some of the traditional views within Christian history?
Well, one prevalent interpretation, and our sources discuss this, is that Cain and Seth Abel, having died, married their sisters.
Okay.
The rationale within that specific early narrative context is simply the necessity to populate the earth. There weren't other options presented in that framework.
Right. Though that idea can be, well, unsettling for us today. We have strong taboos about incest, genetic concerns.
Absolutely. And the traditional view acknowledges that, but suggests those specific prohibitions weren't yet established or maybe weren't relevant in that unique primordial context. It was seen as a necessity for humanity's continuation within the story.
That's a perspective rooted specifically in the needs of that early time in the narrative. Are there other explanations Christian scholars have explored?
Yes, another viewpoint, which some Christian scholars favor, suggests the possibility of other human populations existing outside the Garden of Eden.
Ah, okay, so Adam and Eve weren't necessarily the only two people.
In this interpretation, they might be seen as representative figures, the start of God's covenant people perhaps, but not the sole biological progenitors of all humans from the absolute beginning. This aligns a bit more easily with contemporary scientific understandings of human origins.
But that requires a less literal reading of Genesis, right?
It does. It involves a more figurative or symbolic reading of those early chapters. And importantly, the church generally doesn't mandate a strictly literal interpretation of every single detail in early Genesis. There's room for symbolic and spiritual understanding.
So multiple viewpoints exist within Christian thought.
Definitely. But notice the common thread. Regardless of the specific how, the underlying spiritual truth being emphasized is the unity of humanity. One family, ultimately under God. The how is secondary to that message.
Right, the silence almost invites focus on the spiritual truths. Okay, now, the Bible famously says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. How did Adam and Eve actually, do that on a grand scale, populate the whole planet?
Well, the key thing to grasp from that Christian historical standpoint is that the Bible gives us a theological framework for population, not really a detailed demographic study.
So the command sets the intention.
Exactly. The command sets the intention, and the generations mentioned later in Genesis illustrate the beginning of that process. And from a psychological view, that innate human drive to procreate is fundamental. Adam and Eve, as the first humans in the narrative, would naturally embody this.
Okay, but thinking about the billions of people on Earth now, starting from just two individuals, that raises some pretty significant questions, doesn't it? Especially around, genetic diversity.
It absolutely does. And this is an area where Christian thinkers often encourage a reconciliation of faith and reason. Modern science does raise valid points about the challenges, population bottlenecks, genetic diversity if you start with only two individuals.
So how does Christian thought grapple with that?
It often leads to a more nuanced interpretation of the Adam and Eve narrative. One way is, as we touched on, seeing Adam and Eve as
Representatives of humanity's beginnings, maybe. God's covenant.
Precisely. Which allows for a broader understanding of the initial human population, ensuring genetic viability wasn't solely dependent on them. Another approach keeps the focus squarely on the spiritual origins. Meaning the central message is about our relationship with God, the entry of sin, and the start of salvation history, rather than a purely biological account of how the entire globe got populated solely from those two.
And the command, be fruitful, could mean more than just having babies.
That's another layer, yes. It can be seen metaphorically, too, spreading God's love, developing human potential, cultivating the earth and our gifts. It's about a theological framework for understanding our origins and growth, guided by both faith and reason.
Okay, so it's about the deeper meaning, not just literal numbers. Got it. Now, we know about Cain, Abel, and Seth. Does the Bible mention any other children? Did Adam and Eve have more kids?
Interestingly, yes. The sources point us to a specific verse, Genesis 5.4. It notes that after Seth was born, Adam lived many more years and had other sons and daughters.
Ah, so it explicitly says that.
It does. While Cain, Abel, and Seth are named because they're key to the early narrative, the first murder, the replacement lineage, this verse clearly indicates their family was larger.
And thinking back to the ancient genealogies.
Right, they often focused on the key figures relevant to the theological message. Omitting other names wouldn't be unusual. Plus, given Adam's recorded lifespan, 930 years according to Genesis.
Wow, yeah. That's a long time.
It's logical to assume they would have had numerous children over centuries.
That makes total sense. So what are the implications, then, within Christian thought of them having more children, these unnamed sons and daughters?
Well, one key implication loops back to the question we just discussed. Where did the sons find wives?
Ah, if they were daughters.
Exactly. The existence of unnamed daughters strongly suggests that the early generations likely married within close kinship brothers and sisters, which, again, raises those modern ethical and genetic flags for us, but wasn't yet forbidden, according to this early biblical understanding and narrative necessity. Theologically, though, the idea of a larger original family really reinforces the concept of humanity as one big interconnected family.
All sharing a common ancestry.
Precisely. It underscores our shared humanity. The Bible doesn't give us a detailed family roster, obviously, but this hint of more children encourages perhaps a humble approach. We acknowledge Scripture doesn't intend to answer every single historical detail.
Did any early Christian thinkers comment on this?
Some did. Some church fathers, like St. Augustine, speculated about a multitude of unnamed offspring, but ultimately the core message remains that spiritual unity of the human family under God.
It really does emphasize that fundamental connection between all people. Okay, so considering everything we've discussed, the kids, the reproduction, the lineage, what does the Bible sort of as a whole reveal about Adam and Eve's family life?
Well, from a Christian perspective, the Bible gives us these powerful glimpses into the very beginnings of human family dynamics. You see the joy of creation and procreation. The birth of Cain is initially presented positively.
Right, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord.
Exactly. But then you witness the tragic emergence of sin and conflict, Cain's jealousy and actions against Abel. It's raw.
Devastatingly so.
But then there's also the resilience of hope, right? With the birth of Seth seen as a replacement, a continuation of a godly line, and adding in the mention of other sons and daughters just broadens that picture of an early, complex family.
And psychologically.
What resonates so strongly from a psychological viewpoint are those raw, universal human emotions right there at the start. Joy, loss, jealousy, hope, grief. These are experiences that shape families throughout all of history.
So it's not just a historical record.
No, definitely not. It's a theological narrative exploring our origins and our relationship with God, seen through the lens of this first family. They kind of serve as a prototype, a foundational model for all families, illustrating the potential for both profound love and devastating conflict.
And highlighting family life as central.
Central to God's plan, yeah. A school of love, a place for spiritual growth, even amidst the struggles.
It's quite striking how those fundamental human experiences are present right from the beginning. Okay, now, this might seem like a really basic question, but how were Adam and Eve actually related to each other, before they became a couple, within Christian thought?
This touches on a really unique and symbolic aspect of their creation story. Genesis 2 describes Eve being created from Adam's rib while he was in a deep sleep.
Right, the rib story.
Christian theology generally doesn't interpret that as a literal genetic relationship in the way we think of biology today.
Okay, so not like siblings or a parent-child in a biological sense.
No. Instead, it emphasizes a profound spiritual and ontological connection, a unity at the very core of their being.
Bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh.
Exactly. Adam's declaration when he sees Eve, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh," signifies that essential unity, their complementarity. Psychologically, you could say it speaks to that deep human longing for companionship, for a partner, for a sense of wholeness.
Have historical interpretations looked at symbolically too?
Oh, yes. Historically, the Church Fathers explored various allegorical meanings. For example, seeing Eve's creation from Adam's side as a prefigurement of the church being born from the wounded side of Christ on the cross.
Interesting.
So it's primarily understood as a theological statement about the nature of humanity, our shared origin in God, and the intended partnership and equality between man and woman. It highlights a connection that really transcends mere genetics. They are partners, progenitors, bound by something powerful and mysterious.
That really shifts the focus from a biological link to a fundamental God-given unity.
Okay, so building on that, what did the early church fathers teach more broadly about the descendants of Adam and Eve?
Well, a really central theme in the teachings of the church fathers is the unity of the entire human race.
Stemming from Adam and Eve.
Yes, all descending from this one origin point. St. Augustine, who was hugely influential in Christian history, strongly emphasized this. It's a foundational belief that underscores our shared equality and interconnectedness as one human family.
What about original sin?
That was another major topic. They grappled with the concept of original sin, seeing Adam as a representative head of humanity, whose fall affected all descendants. St. Irenaeus and Augustine were key here in the West.
Were there different views?
There were nuances. Eastern fathers, like St. John Chrysostom, sometimes emphasized slightly different aspects, like the inheritance of mortality and corruption rather than guilt in the same way. Psychologically, though, you can see how this concept highlights the interconnectedness of human actions and their consequences rippling through generations. Did they talk about diversity among the descendants?
They did, which is fascinating. Some fathers, like St. Gregory of Nyssa, actually marveled at the diversity within Adam and Eve's descendants. Different appearances, cultures, languages.
Right.
He saw this variety not as a problem, but as a reflection of God's infinite creativity and richness.
That's a powerful perspective, almost an antidote to racism.
Exactly. These historical teachings were incredibly formative. They shaped Christian understanding of what it means to be human, anthropology, our ethics, and this idea of a shared origin being the basis for solidarity and equality.
It's remarkable how much those early thinkers shaped. Okay, final big question then. Tying it all together, how does this whole story of Adam and Eve help us understand the incredible diversity we see in humanity today from that Christian perspective?
Well, the story provides a kind of foundational understanding for diversity. Right from the start, in Genesis 1, humanity is created in God's image significantly as male and female.
So diversity is there from the beginning.
Yes, an inherent diversity reflecting God's own multifaceted nature. In a sense, you could say Adam and Eve contain the potential for all the variations we see in humanity. The blueprint was there.
And the command to multiply and fill the earth.
That command inherently suggests dispersion. As people spread out across the globe over millennia, it would naturally lead to the development of different cultures, languages, adaptations to environments, physical characteristics.
Does the Tower of Babel story fit in here too?
It does, in a way. Although it's often seen as a story about judgment and division, its result was the further scattering and diversification of humanity and languages, ensuring humanity spread across the earth as God intended.
So historically, this provided a basis for seeing everyone as equal.
Yes, historically, this biblical worldview provided a foundation for recognizing the fundamental equality of all human beings, despite our differences. As we mentioned, church fathers like Augustine viewed this diversity positively as reflecting God's infinite richness.
So underlying unity, but surface diversity.
Exactly. Beneath all the outward differences, the story emphasizes our fundamental unity, a shared origin, a shared human nature, all descendants of Adam and Eve in this theological framework.
And that's relevant today.
Hugely relevant.
Yeah.
It challenges any ideology based on racial or cultural superiority. It affirms the inherent dignity of every single person. It encourages us to celebrate cultural diversity as something that enriches the whole human family, seeing it as integral to God's creative plan, not accidental.
Wow. Okay, so let's try and bring this all together. This deep dive into Adam and Eve, looking through Christian history and psychology. It reveals their story is, well, it's way more than just a simple beginning, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a foundational narrative. It tackles the huge questions about life, family, our shared humanity, diversity, our relationship with God.
Yeah, we've seen how divine intent and maybe natural human inclinations likely intertwined in the early understanding, like with reproduction.
And we considered the different perspectives on that tricky question of their sons' wives, the traditional view, the scholarly interpretations.
And the theological weight behind populating the earth, seeing it maybe less as just numbers and more about purpose, while also acknowledging the likelihood of a larger early family than just the named sons.
Right, and the Bible portrays this primal family experiencing those timeless joys and sorrows of human connection, rooted in that unique, profound bond between Adam and Eve themselves.
A bond described as bone of my bones, emphasizing unity over just biology.
Exactly. Then the Church Fathers built on this, didn't they? Illuminating the unity of humankind, grappling with original sin, but also recognizing the beauty of diversity within Adam and Eve's lineage as reflecting God's own creativity.
So ultimately, their story provides this incredible lens, a way to better understand with our shared origins and the magnificent tapestry of human diversity.
It really does. It sets the stage for so much that follows in understanding the human condition from this perspective.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. Considering the enduring power of this ancient story, this narrative about Adam and Eve, what does it really reveal about our own ongoing, maybe universal search for meaning and our place within the grand narrative of existence?
That's a great question to ponder.
Perhaps exploring some of the sources we touched upon or related works in theology and psychology could shed even more light on this profound and enduring story for you.